Corey Renner from Local Motors, and I'm here to talk about transmissions today. I've been doing some R&D work on the transmission for the Gas Cruiser, which is the bike back here. And there's a few different transmissions that we've experimented with, and there's different issues with each one. So now that we're getting ready for production, I'm going back and taking a closer look at each one to see if there's a way to improve them, eliminate some of the problems that we've had. I've got two different kinds here. This is a Skyhawk timing belt drive transmission. We played around with this a little bit. There's some issues with it. The covers crack. These brackets tend to break. Overall, it works pretty well. It is large. The biggest issue with it is this freewheel right here. The way this works, there's a center hub and there's a sprocket. And in one direction they lock tight, and in the other direction they're meant to just spin. And you can hear it click just like you hear normally on a bicycle on the rear wheel. The problem that we've had with this thing is that they tend to unscrew themselves and fall apart. There's a bunch of ball bearings in here and they'll all come out. I've dug into this a bit to see what's going on, and the basic problem boils down to when you bolt this thing into position and you put a nut on here, there's a little bit of room between the center hub and this face, and that gap allows this thing to loosen up, and it changes the preload, which makes them explosively disassemble themselves. So to get around that, I came up with this. It's basically a washer with a relief cut on the back. And the idea is that you can put it on here, and when you bolt it down, instead of clamping on the shaft, it clamps on the face so that there's no room for it to disassemble itself. This might not be very clear in the video, but if you go on to Co-Create, I've got some renders and you can actually see this from different angles, and you can see how it's able to come apart if it's not clamped properly. So I'm taking another look at this transmission and seeing whether or not with this improvement we can get this thing to be a better alternative than what we're using. This is the one that was used in the prototype Gas Cruisers. This is the Skyhawk Stage 3. I've had a couple of issues with this one. It tends to leak oil from the bottom. There's a seal in the back that also leaks. This is the seal that they're using. It's a very poor quality seal. I was looking into getting a better quality one to replace it, but it's an oddball size, so I haven't been able to find one off the shelf. So an experiment that I'm trying is we pulled the bearing out of this, and it normally uses shielded bearings, which means they have a metal cover, but they're not actually sealed against oil. So I'm replacing that type of bearing with a sealed bearing where there's a rubber gasket on each side. And we're hoping that in the absence of this thing, that sealed bearing will actually hold the oil and let us get around that. So that's in there now. You can see that orange ring is the seal. The other thing that we did in here that's kind of interesting is there's, it actually has 3 bearings in it. And when we had it all apart, we replaced that one to try to seal better, but this bearing was bad. And one of the things that's tricky is how to remove it. The bearing on the end, you have access to either side, so you can press it out. In the case of this one, you only have access from one side. So since you can't get behind it, the problem is how do you get it out? One way of doing it is you can fill the cavity behind it with grease and use a punch that fits closely and hit it with a hammer and hydraulically press it out. But that's messy. And in the case of this one, it was a bad bearing anyway, so we didn't care about removing it without destroying it. So we did it the quick and dirty way, which is take a bolt and you actually weld the bolt to the bearing. And then once that was on there, this is the old bearing, we're able to just take a socket and put a nut on here and tighten it up and draw it out. So this is the old one that came out. It actually still spins even though it now has a bolt permanently attached to it. Then you can see the nice new bearing that's in there. And so we're gonna put this all back together with new bearings in it and test that out and see if we can get it to not leak and work a little better than it has in the past. And then we've got 2 more transmission options we're gonna be exploring. One is the Q-Matic, which is a US-made belt drive transmission. It's gotten very good reviews. We ordered one about a week ago. It's not in yet. It's supposed to be here tomorrow. So I'm anxious to get my hands on that and see how well that performs. And then the final option we're going to explore is doing a 100% custom transmission that we make in-house. Still kind of drawing that up in the computer, figuring out how that's going to work. But the hope is to get all 4 transmissions on bikes, start putting miles on them, see what works well, what doesn't, see if it's worth improving some of these imported transmissions or if we're better with a completely homegrown one. So stay tuned and we'll have some more updates pretty soon.